Fishful Thinker Television, brought to you by Sportsman's Warehouse, America's premier outfitter. HPZ Workstations, performance, innovation, and reliability with game-changing design and cutting-edge technologies. Coldwell Banker, every day until it's sold. St. Croix Rod, handcrafting fishing rods for over 60 years. Evinrude, spend more time on the water.
All right, good morning. Welcome to Fishful Thinker. I'm your host, Chad LaChance, and I appreciate you joining us this morning. This show is going to be something that's very near and dear to my heart, and I think it's going to be something that if you watch this show, you're going to learn some stuff that I really think is going to help you catch a bunch of fish. What we're going to talk about today is jig fishing. I get lots and lots and lots of questions from seminars and email and everything all over the place. People talk about, how do I really learn to jig? How versatile is a jig? What can I really do with a jig? And a jig is really the oldest and most basic fishing lure. It's also by far the most versatile fishing lure. For everything from trout to bluegills to pike to you name it, everybody will eat a properly presented jig. So today's whole show is going to be a whole breakdown and rundown of how to go about fishing jigs. So get comfortable. And maybe get your notepad out and we'll see if we can teach you how to catch more fish where you fish. Now if you notice, I'm holding this rod very lightly. I'm not gripping it. I don't have a death grip on this rod. I'm holding it very lightly and I'm keeping my tip up. I'm just kind of letting the rod hang in my hand. Basically, it's a finesse thing. It's a feel thing. I don't want to be gripping on the rod. I won't have any feel with the rod if I do that. So by working the rod with a little bit more finesse presentation, I'm keeping the rod tip up because that allows me to see the line the best. If I have the rod tip down here, I have less line to watch and I certainly have less sensitivity, then I won't feel these fish. And one of the beauties, the versatility of the jig and why the jig is so versatile is because I can tip it with anything. The jig head itself is really what makes the presentation, but I can put anything from a straight tail worm on it to a 3-inch minnow like I have here, to a leech, to a curl-tail grub, to a split-tail grub, to a small swim bait, to just about anything can be put on the jig head. That's part of the versatility. The other part of the versatility is you can get a jig head from about a 64th of an ounce all the way to 8 ounces, which we would jig groupers in the Gulf with. So the spot that I'm fishing here is actually a channel swing, and it's fairly deep right here. It's about 20 feet right under the boat, but I'm only half a cast length from the bank. So for me to keep my jig in bottom contact means I'm gonna have to let that bait get deeper and deeper as it comes towards me. I don't necessarily need this particular jig, since we're fishing the minnow jig. I don't need it to stay pinned to the bottom, but I still want it to relate to the bottom. I want to more or less follow that incline as it comes down there. So I'll make my throw up on the bank there, and it's a real steep bank, and I've got my rod tip high, and I can watch that line as that jig basically pendulums towards me. When it stops sinking and it hits the bottom, assuming it hasn't been bit, I'll lift it gently and kind of work it like a slinky down the stairs, where it just goes down a little bit down the embankment each time until eventually we get to the bottom of the channel or get bit. Here's a bite. Got him. All right. So there. Whole deal with that is just watching that line sink. When that line starts sinking and it starts swimming off to one side, unless you got some really tricky jigs like I don't have, my jigs don't swim on their own. So as somebody bites it, it's moving off to one side. And again, we're not expecting a lot of giant fish today. Our goal is not to show you the biggest fish that you've ever seen today. Our goal is to show you fundamental techniques. Little smallmouth like this, wherever you swim, is definitely interested in eating an 1/8 ounce jig like this. Absolutely no problem to it. But the whole deal is you gotta watch that line sink, and as that line's sinking, I see it start to move off to one side. That's how you feel that you got bites. Doesn't matter how sensitive this St. Croix is or this fluorocarbon, the bottom line is I catch more fish by watching my line. Here's a bite right here. Got that one. Just like that, same thing. Now we got a little school of them right here. And again, these are not big fish, but I'm here to illustrate fundamental techniques. You know, I'm on a fishery that I fish all the time. I guide here. I'm on Horsetooth Reservoir in Fort Collins, Colorado. And the whole point of me being here is so I can catch lots of fish and show you lots of different ways to jig. And again, we got a little baby right here, a little overachiever, but you get the point. All right, so in our continuing effort to show you the versatility of the homely little jig head, now we're gonna step it to a little bit different. Now I've got a football head jig, and I'll give you a little close-up of this, and I've rigged it with a Berkeley bulky hog. And what this particular bait looks like, you can see there that the jig head itself is shaped like a football, and the bait's got a lot of bulk to it, and it's got a lot of appendages sticking off it, and all those are gonna bleed gulp into the water. Now I've got it on 10-pound test fluorocarbon, so this rig's a little bit heavier, and I have it on casting gear. I'm not telling you at any level that you have to throw it on casting gear. I could certainly throw this on a little bit heavier spinning rod if I would like to do that. It's only a medium power rod. It's just that the casting gear gives me real good accuracy, and I can roll cast the bait, as you're gonna see. The reason I've chosen a football head is my intention is to drag this. You can see we've got a bank behind us, a bunch of big rock on it, but it's gravel at the base of that rock. So my intention is to drag this jig head on the bottom and see who's down there. Very good possibility of bass or walleyes. A little football head jig with a crayfish imitation like this, especially one made out of gulp, will definitely catch a variety of fish. So let's see what happens. When you see that jig starts to pull in the rocks, every now and then you're gonna see me do that. I'm gonna lift on the rod tip and I'm gonna watch that line really close, and I'm gonna lift on it very gently, and I mean gently. I'm not gonna snap on it, I'm just gonna lift on it real gentle. And what I'm doing is I'm feeling for pressure. I wanna feel for a fish to be gently pulling on that. And people ask me, they say, well, won't the fish feel the hook and spit it out? Well, if you think about what you're imitating right here, you're imitating a crayfish, and a crayfish has sharp claws, and he's got a tail that's sharp, and he's got a horn on the top of his head. And realistically, when a bass or a walleye eats a crayfish, that crayfish doesn't just roll over and get swallowed without a fight. Crayfish is a nasty little critter, and it's a safe bet that that thing's gonna fight for all it's worth before it gets swallowed. So my little hook with my little quarter-ounce football head on it is really not a big deal to a smallmouth or a walleye that might pick that jig up. Here's a fish right here. Got him. All right, so that fish was out deep, and you see I was just dragging that jig down the bottom. I got a little walleye this time. And we're gonna go ahead and swing him up in here, and that goes to show you it's exactly what I'm talking about. Everybody in the Western United States eats crayfish. This might look like a bass technique or a bass presentation, and certainly this isn't the biggest walleye I've ever seen, but the reality of the situation is crayfish are a really, really prevalent food source all over the United States, and especially in the West, and therefore using a jig of some sort with a crayfish on it is a good call. A little walleye, nothing fancy to him, but a nice little fish, and he played our game. That's the important part.
One of the most fundamental decisions you have to make when it comes to fishing jigs particularly is what kind of line to fish them on. When you're fishing jigs, you need sensitivity. You also need to be castability, you need hook set ability. The jig fishing is one of the most line intensive things out there. For me, it comes down to two possibilities. Either fluorocarbon line or a braided line, or some combination thereof. Day in and day out, for real light line fishing, I'll use a straight fluorocarbon. 4, 6, maybe 8-pound test is an excellent choice with straight fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon has less stretch than monofilament. It certainly has a better abrasion resistance than monofilament, and it has excellent shock resistance. So for big hook sets, you can get the big monster hook sets we all like to get. The fluorocarbon's a really good choice for that. If you really need a little bit heavier line, a braided line of some sort like this is a good choice. I can run a lot higher pound test of line, I can cast farther with it, and I can get hook sets from farther out. This particular braided line is Fireline Tracer braid. It's got a color increment every 2.5 feet, and it floats, so I can see it floating on the surface of the water and I can see my subtle bites. Because of that visibility, most of the time I will tip it with a fluorocarbon leader joined with a uni knot and put the two together so that I get my jig fishing done by having the best of both worlds. Either way, if you select your line for jig fishing specifically, you'll catch more fish.
All right, so in our continuing effort to show the versatility of the jig, we're going to continue to mix it up back and forth with different jigs. Now, one of the most key things about fishing a jig, in my personal opinion, and one of the things that a lot of people do wrong, I feel like, is they put too heavy of a jig on. Here I've got really flat conditions. As you can see, it's really calm out here. The last thing I want is a real heavy jig that's gonna pin right to the bottom. I don't want a jig that's gonna right to the bottom. That's just very unnatural. There are times when a heavier jig head can be good, and that's because you can snap jig it. So if I'm snap jigging, I'm being real aggressive with it, a heavy jig might be a better choice there because the bait reacts faster. But the bottom line is a lighter jig head almost always is a better choice than a heavy jig head for not getting snags and certainly for getting bites. Now here's a fish right here. Got him. All right, now you see again, no hurry, don't try to get on a giant hurry to get that hook set. That jig's clearly swimming, moving out towards me. I'm using a Gulp product on here. I got a Gulp Bulky Hog on here. And ooh, we got a big old giant fish following the one we got hooked. So we're gonna catch him too real quick. We're gonna drop this one down here and see if we can get him. And we're gonna do the double. We're gonna show you why it really doesn't matter what you jig a whole lot, so much as it's got the flavor on it. We'll see if we can get this other one to bite it too. Now, maybe not this time. We'll leave that rod sitting there and get this guy off. But the bottom line is, the versatility of the jig head is really hard to beat. I've got a real light jig head here. I didn't get in a hurry on the hook set. And again, that's no huge smallmouth, but we're not here trying to catch huge smallmouth today. We're here to try to show you how versatile a jig can be. Don't want to get in a hurry on the hook set. I lifted on that. I could definitely see that the fish was swimming. I never felt it. This is incredibly light, an incredibly sensitive rod, and I did not feel that fish at all. The line starts swimming. I pick up on the rod a little bit real gently. You can see the line swimming out and go ahead and set the hook. Don't have to get in a hurry. Getting in a hurry is what's actually going to make you miss more fish than not. Now that fish had a huge fish swimming with him. There's one right here. Got that one. All right. And again, no hurry on him. Just throw out the football head and let it sink. And give myself time to get my hook set, get turned around how I want it, and get the direction that the fish is moving figured out right away. And I can see that this fish was clearly moving off one way, so I swing the other way, make sure we get him hooked. And it's just not that difficult, not a lot of rocket science. They're hooked right in the tip of the nose, another pretty little smallie. Gotta like him in the morning sun, we'll kiss him. Well, that's good luck. I always like to kiss one or two every day to make sure it's real good luck, you know. But I just want to illustrate a point here. Obviously we found a little pocket of fish and they'll eat this football head jig, but that doesn't mean that they won't hit an 1/8 ounce jig that's a darter headed jig with a Gulp minnow on it. So I'm gonna throw that in the same pocket and we'll see if they'll bite that as well. And this isn't some secret spot that we're fishing. Basically what we're doing is we're concentrating on a little drain right here. We've got a little valley right here that comes out, gives us a little bit deeper spot than some of the water around it. We'll see if one of them will eat the minnow as well. And with the minnow, I don't tend to keep it, got that one, nope, there's the bottom. With the minnow, I don't try to keep it as bottom oriented. The minnow bait, obviously, being that it's a minnow type deal, I still want it close to the bottom. I just don't necessarily want it right on the bottom. Whereas with that crayfish jig that we were just fishing a second ago, I'm putting that thing right on the bottom and dragging it. This, I'm kind of more pendulum him. So I lift on it, I'll lift up, and I'll take up some of the slack, and then I'll follow the bait back down with the rod tip, and I'm always watching that line. There's fish right here. Got him. See, no hurry. Don't have to get in a hurry. There's no hurry on it. Now we got us a walleye this time, and we're sitting on the same spot. It's a good feeding spot apparently, and we got us a little walleye pinned up here. And it's a little guy, but again, I'm just trying to illustrate my point on the versatility of the jig. Got an 1/8 ounce jig, got a 3-inch Gulp minnow on it, got it on 6-pound fluorocarbon, and got a wee little baby walleye. And I don't kiss them because they have teeth, so we're gonna put him back. But crayfish jig on the heavy football head, drug on the bottom, caught a walleye, caught several smallmouth. Same spot, haven't even moved the boat. Now I've got an 1/8 ounce jig that's a darter head with a 3-inch minnow, swimming it through the water column, letting it lift and then pendulum back and lift and pendulum back. Again, catch smallmouth and walleyes with it. So very versatile bait, can do a lot of things with it. Okay, so we've stepped away from the gravel bank. Now we're on some real steep stuff right here. And anytime you're gonna work a jig on real steep stuff like this, you could be at Powell, or you could be at Boise, or you could be at Pueblo, Colorado, or you could be at Glendo. There's steep bluff banks like this. I want the jig to hit very close to the bank. Generally, I want a very light jig head, and I want that jig to swim down these bluffs. Whether you're dealing with walleyes that are sitting against the bluffs, or you're dealing with smallmouth like we're most likely looking at here today, or you're dealing with any number of fish that sit against a bluff bank like this, spotted bass, love it. Letting that jig go straight down that bluff wall is key. So we'll throw it right against the wall, close the bail. I've got my rod tip really high. If you notice, my rod tip's really high. And as that jig works down, all I'm doing as we drift towards it is managing a little bit of slack and follow that line. I'm keeping my eyes on the line and follow that jig down that drop. One thing I find as a guide that most people do is they overwork the jig in a big way. They want to get all crazy with it and really be snapping on it and hopping on it. And there's certainly times when you can do that. And I'm all for it at certain times. When would I snap jig? Potentially when I'm trying to provoke a reaction type strike. But as you look at here today, we've got relatively overcast conditions. It is June here in Colorado, and probably wherever you are as well. But it's June, and that basically means that our bass and walleyes would certainly be feeding, so I'm not doing anything more than just basically trying to get my jig in front of some fish. One of the real common questions I get is, what color jig heads do I use? Well, for me, more often than not, jig head's natural lead color. I don't find a huge difference in a color. Now, if I'm in very muddy water, I might use a bright color like an orange or a pink jig head, or maybe a chartreuse jig head. If I'm trout fishing specifically, a lot of times I'll use a red jig head. I find that trout tend to like that red. Here's a fish right here. Got that one. Now that fish was deep underneath the boat, and just working down that ledge, and see, we got us a walleye again now. And we'll get a hold of this guy over here real gentle. Come on up in here. 6-pound test, and I probably shouldn't be swinging him like that. You notice I got a good hook on him right in the top of the snout. And that's a good walleye. Nothing, not giant, but it's a good one. That's definitely the kind you're looking for out here. Big giant mouth on him. We'll put him back. But the deal is this, the real steep bank, working that jig straight down that bank, feeling for it, watching for it. That one I actually did feel him, and just a little tick on it, and set the hook, and you got him. Jig head strikes again. Got that one. Now there was no hurry. This is probably a little tiny fish, but that fish was messing with that bait for a while, and it is a little tiny fish, and I figured it was. One of the things you can tell when you're jig fishing a lot of times is if your fish grabs your bait and takes off running with it, a lot of the time it's going to be a little guy. And the reason being, it's kind of like that pigeon at McDonald's. He grabs that french fry, he wants out of there before all the other pigeons see he's got that french fry. But day in and day out, an 1/8-ounce jig head with a 3-inch gulp minnow on 6-pound fluorocarbon will catch everybody in the pond. Here's a fish right here. Fish swimming with my jig now. He's just swimming, no hurry, no hurry, no hurry. Got him. See what I mean? There is no point in getting in a giant hurry on getting your hook sets. The whole deal with the jig is making sure you get an intelligent hook set, not a fast hook set. And then with the gulp, they're just not gonna spit it out. That's what it comes down to. Now this is a decent fish right here. We like this one, and we'll be careful with him. We got him 6-pound. Now you'd think that a big fish like this, that's a nice smallmouth right there. Now, it goes to show you the versatility of the jig. There's a little 3-inch minnow right there, 6-pound test. You're going to Lake Powell, you're going to wherever, you name it. If there's smallmouth in there, a little jig like that will get it done. Let's get this one put back here real nice. I like these ones. We'll kiss him. We'll put that one back. That's a purty fish right there. That's a solid, probably 15 or 16-inch fish. See you, buddy. Again, it's a very spot-specific thing. I can't reach the bottom with a variety of other baits. It's just too deep. So a crankbait or a jerkbait or anything like that is not going to get me to the bottom where I expect both my bass and my smallmouth are sitting. So a jig, again, is the way to go. It's going to get my bait to the bottom. It's going to keep it in my strike zone the longest, and there's a bite right here. And I got him. And the whole deal is just dragging that thing on the bottom like that. And I don't know what I got, but I'm betting it's a walleye just because of the feel of the bite. Generally, walleyes will actually bite the bait and you'll feel it. So that's a little different than the smallmouth. And sure enough, we did get a walleye right here, and a respectable walleye at that. And the deal though, put the jig in the bottom and do very little with it. And this is a nice fish right here. It's a pretty walleye. We'll come over here and see if we can get him. Got a good hook set right in the tip of the snout. We'll swing him up in here. And that 6-pound fluorocarbon's got plenty of oomph. You can see I got that jig right in the corner there. And that's a beautiful walleye, you know. I mean, it's not a monster walleye by any stretch, but it's a real pretty fish. It'd be a great eating size fish in most lakes. I'd be loving to be chewing on that one. Of course, with those teeth, I think he'd be loving to be chewing on me. But the deal is, it's the deep bottom right here. It's like 20 feet deep. Can't reach that with anything else but a jig. And so I put the jig on the bottom, drag it along, get the bite, get the fish. Perfect system. That's why we jig fish. See you, buddy. Here's one right here, ready? We got that one. All right, now this fish was way down there deep, and we're just trying to illustrate the versatility. Same 1/8 ounce jig head. This time I got the leech on there. I got a little 3-inch leech on it. And just a natural black 3-inch leech. And again, we're not out here fishing for monsters today. We're just trying to instill some confidence that the jig fishing really isn't that complicated and it isn't that hard. It's about sticking to some fundamentals. It's about slacklining your baits. It's about not keeping your line so tight that the jig doesn't behave naturally. It's about versatility for a variety of species, including little fat, small, look at the belly on that one, little fatty. But it's about versatility for a variety of species. Walleyes, wipers, trout, bass, everybody eats the jig. You gotta love it, but remember at all times, use your sensitive rod, don't keep the line too tight, and watch your line at all costs. You're gonna catch more fish. So that's jig fishing for you. Hopefully you enjoyed Fishful Thinker today. We appreciate it, and we'll see you next week. There's fish right here. No fish. Hook sets are free though. You spit it. Now here he comes. Ready? Oh, dude, he got my worm. Oh, they're messing with me. I think there's more fish there than I realize.